Come ye o frae France, come ye din by lan, and saw ye Geordie whelps and his bonny women. Were ye at the place, ca the kittle housey, saw ye Geordie's grace riding on the goosey. Geordie, he's a man, there is little due to it, he does all he can. Walk and be with you, dun there come a blade, Lincoln like me lordy, he would drive a trade at the loom of Geordie. Hello everyone, this is Avellina Balestri, the Editor-in-Chief of Fellowship and Fairydust, and today we are interviewing Graeme Restorick, the author of The Preston Fight, 1715, England's Last Battle, and a local historian in Lancashire, England. So welcome, Graeme.
Hello, nice to meet you. Sorry, see you. Yeah.
See us again.
Sorry,
we go a ways back. First of all, for people who might not be aware of the geography, where is Lancashire placed on the map of England and also the wider United Kingdom?
So yeah, it's in the north. It's in the northwest of England, on the coast of the Irish Sea. So where it is at the moment, it's on. So it's on the northwest coast of England. It's that part of England where the Isle of Man.
Oh, nice.
So yes, so it's kind of like directly to the east of the Isle of Man. And then it carries on to Ireland, so that's the kind of geographic location. It's probably between Wales and Scotland, basically.
And yeah. That's why it pops up in certain maps that try to pinpoint the Celtic areas of Britain that we were just talking about the other day.
Yeah. I believe it used to be part of the sort of, I think the Welsh call it the Lost Lands.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, I mean, because we know now, I mean, when we think back about all these movements of peoples, it never was quite as strict, quite frankly, as sometimes we're led to think with regards to the Anglo-Saxons moving and all the Celts disappearing. Oftentimes it was more overlay of cultures happening, especially within particular places, like you're saying, like Lancashire and others within England. It's never kind of purely one thing or purely another in this context.
No, I think it would be fair to say it kind of happened in stages, and I think there was a degree of intermarriage between the invading sort of Anglos, Saxons, and Jutes, and the local population. In Cumbria, the Celtic language and culture survived into the Middle Ages. I believe. I mean, it's not my sort of specialist area of not historical knowledge, but it lasted. Of all the parts of England except for Cornwall, the sort of the Iron Age Celtic culture lasted in the northwest of England, what's now the northwest of England, for longer than the rest of England. It would be fair to say.
Right. And there's different layers of things with regards to culture and different types of culture intermixing, and then things like actual DNA stuff. And we kind of know now, like the British population, the population of the British Isles actually has a lot in common. I mean, even from all the way back then to now, as far as things go, hasn't actually changed that dramatically. So it's, definitely a lot of interbreeding and so on.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, the Anglo-Saxons do form a key component of the DNA of the English, but there was from what I recall quite a lot of intermarriage. So it was a cultural displacement, rather than strictly speaking a DNA displacement.
Right. But anyway, moving on to more your specialty subjects. So you wrote this book on the 1715 Jacobite Rebellion. So what initially got you interested in that?
Well, I went to university to study history at the University of Central Lancashire in Preston. when I was there, I was actually surprised. It was actually after I graduated that I found out that there was a battle in 1715 between the Jacobites and the government side in 1715. I hadn't heard about it while I was studying there. It was something I found. I can't remember how I found out exactly. And that sort of piqued my interest, and I wanted to try and read and find out about it, but there wasn't actually that much on it. So I kind of had to. I kind of had the idea then that, oh well, if nobody else has written anything about it, maybe I should have a go. Of course, subsequently to when I actually wrote that, somebody has released a proper book looking at the battle. I think he's called Jonathan Oates, but his book is something like 60 whatever that is in dollars, whereas mine is $1.99. Available from all good online Amazon bookshops.
Yours is for the yours is for the common man, a book for the common man.
That is for the lay reader who wants to find out about it rather than willing to spend like $80 or something on a big serious book.
Yeah, and I mean that's actually really valuable what you've contributed to it too, because let's face it, I mean, even like people interested in the Jacobite rebellions is a niche. The 1715 one is not as popular as the 45 typically. So that's more of a niche. The particular, goings on in Lancashire and Preston is even more of a niche. So you've kind of, you've presented it in a way where people who, again, won't want to put in $60 to $80 into researching this will still be able to read it and get familiar with this slice of history that they wouldn't ordinarily know about. So that's great. Yeah,
that was kind of what I intended to do. Really, it's not a big weighty academic tome. It's just kind of like a concise kind of overview of the battle for just for people who want to read up and find out a bit more about it. So yeah, I mean, like I say, I mean, I'd hate to over-egg it because it's like on sale for $1.99. But yeah,
over-egg it. We're a literary magazine. We're a literary magazine.
It's the greatest tome ever written, and yeah, it's amazing.
There you go.
But yeah,
everyone, it's a must read. It is a must read.
Must read essential. And if you do read it, leave a nice review and say how amazing it was and how excellent value for money it is.
Yes.
And spread the word.
So, can you tell people first off a little bit about what are the Jacobite rebellions? Who are the Jacobites for people who don't know?
So basically the Jacobites, it comes from the Latin Jacobus, which is the Latin for James. So what happened basically in 1688 is, I'll try and make it as concise as I can. So James II, who succeeded his brother Charles II, was a convert to Catholicism. And he inherited the throne. Oh gosh, probably before 1685.
Sometime before.
Sometime before. Yeah. I mean, I'm terrible for for particular dates, but basically he was a Roman Catholic. He converted to Roman Catholicism before his brother Charles II died, and he inherited the throne as a Catholic. Now, obviously, it's 17th century England, so a lot of people aren't happy with the fact that he's Catholic because of all the sort of the conflicts between the Protestants and Catholics in 17th century Europe. But they were kind of willing to, the government in England was more or less willing to tolerate it because his daughters were Protestant. His daughters preceded his conversion to Catholicism, so that they were going to become, well, Mary was going to become queen when James II died. But what happened is he, with his second wife, who was a Catholic, he actually had a son who is now known to history as the Old Pretender, and to Jacobites he's known as James III.
And the warming pan baby.
Yeah, the warming pan baby. Yeah. So basically, what that entailed then is that the throne would be inherited by a Catholic, and you know, obviously the sort of the ruling elite and a lot of the population wasn't happy with this. So they forced it. So they forced him out. He was driven. So he was driven into exile in the Glorious Revolution of 1688. What's known as the Glorious Revolution. And yeah, he was driven to France into exile, and Mary II, his Protestant daughter, and her husband, William of Orange, was invited to come in and form a dual monarchy instead.
Which I always found fascinating, because I believe it was sort of unprecedented that you had that kind of consortship quite the same way.
Yeah.
An interesting element to that.
Yeah, it was Mary II's insistence that he should be, you know, sort of joint monarch with her husband. So yeah, so after that, obviously the Jacobites formed, you know, out of the old loyalists to the old sort of Stuart monarchy. And so they popped up throughout this period, you know, so from the time that James II was driven into exile up until, you know, the 45 rebellion. There was basically a series of rebellions to try and restore the Stuarts to the throne. And 1715 was one of those rebellions.
And they were known as Jacobites, starting with James II, but then following through his son James.
Yeah, so
Right.
it was the Old Pretender, who was James II's son, who was known as James III, and the Old Pretender gave birth. Well, his wife obviously gave birth to Bonnie Prince Charlie, who was the Young Pretender. Bonnie Prince Charlie was involved in the more famous 45 rebellion. So the 1715 one, which is what I wrote about, is his earlier attempt to try and regain the throne.
Yeah, and it's interesting, again, like we mentioned earlier, how the 45 tends to get a lot of the focus, I think because of Bonnie Prince Charlie, because of the romanticism around it, and the romanticism that followed after it with regards to, you know, the interest in the Highlands of Scotland with Sir Walter Scott, the Victorian romanticism, and other things that really kind of lent it a special kind of new life. Whereas there is less focus, I mean, quite possibly because the Old Pretender was a little bit less dynamic than the Young Pretender, so that there's less of a focus with the characters of the 1715. But
yeah,
it was a very fascinating conflict as well. It was a very fascinating slice of history, and it did have quite a few very interesting characters.
Well, yeah, I mean, it did have some, you know, romantic characters and stuff, like the Earl of Derwentwater.
Oh yes, please do tell me about him, because tell us about him, should I say? Because yeah, no, he's definitely one of my favorite figures from that. Yeah,
so he was a Northumbrian English earl who was also a devout Roman Catholic. So he joined the the cause to try and restore the Stuart monarchy. So he adopted it early, and he's kind of a quite a tragic figure as well. I mean, I'd say spoiler alert, but it's
it's known. It's
yeah.
known.
So yeah, he went down as quite rather a chivalrous figure in the history of this event. He was William Ainsworth, sorry, the author that wrote a book about the 1715 rebellion and the Preston and the Battle of Preston. William Ainsworth was a Victorian author who apparently he was as famous in his day as Charles Dickens, but he's fallen into obscurity now. Because I guess his novels weren't seen as timeless in the way Charles Dickens was. But yeah, he wrote a book called The Preston Fight, which is a kind of a romantic narrative of the Battle of Preston. So he wrote quite an interesting, sort of historical, heavily fictionalized novel of of the rebellion and that culminated in the Battle of Preston.
I appreciate the romantic, heavily fictionalized novels. They I mean they play fast and loose, but sometimes they are able to capture a certain vibe, a certain thematic arc of an event in history, and I feel like we've lost that a bit. Like some of the flourishing stuff you get with Sir Walter Scott, like it can be a little bit cheesy, but at the same time it captures this epic feel to history. It's an art form in its own right, as it were.
Yeah, it was, and I think unfortunately William Ainsworth was probably he was probably more of his time, the era as Walter Scott. He's still well regarded as an author today, and but yeah, William Ainsworth fell into obscurity. Perhaps if he hadn't fallen into obscurity, the 1715 rebellion would probably be more famous than it is. So yeah, it's kind of like he fell out of style, as it were, sort of after his Victorian heyday.
Which characters did he focus on in his story? Did he focus on anyone particularly, like in the?
I would say most of the focus was on Derwentwater.
Okay.
It had a it had a big romantic subplot. Where he sort of it's very Victorian, and in the sense that it's kind of a very melodramatic, romantic subplot involved. I mean, I won't spoil it for anyone who wants to actually read the book. You'll probably be able to find it somewhere. You probably have to buy an old copy somewhere.
I feel like, well, I mean, we kind of know for a fact, but yeah, the romanticism that you got in the 19th century, works that came out were kind of a reaction against the age of reason that felt like it was sort of crushing the joy out of life without some flavor. And so sometimes they poured on the flavor a little heavy, but it was. It was sort of actually helping in some ways, I feel like, to preserve history, even if in a kind of a weird way, like heavily perfumed, but at the same time, it kind of it keeps it in our consciousness, these events.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about sort of popular historical, sort of fiction like that is it does at least make people aware that the events happened, and then people can come along actually and say, well, here is the truth behind the story. And for example, with Braveheart is a sort of probably a famous example of something that's a heavily fictionalized person surrounding that area of Scottish history. Braveheart really sort of brought in brought wider attention to the story of William Wallace and the history of that particular time and place in history. And people watch Braveheart. Obviously, it's in terms of historical accuracy, it's infamously appalling, but it does at least make people aware, and then historians can kind of come in on that and say, okay, well, this is nonsense, here's the real history behind it. And they've got an audience of people who otherwise would be saying, what are you talking about?
Right.
I've no idea what you're talking about. William Wallace.
I do feel like yeah, Mel Gibson, he definitely in some ways he shares things with the Victorian romantics, the way he tells his grand sweeping narratives, and in some ways I think he lacks all of their class. I don't like Mel Gibson films. I feel like it's not even just that they're kind of playing fast and loose with history. It's the fact that, to me, they're actually in poor taste a lot of the time. They're not romantic in a kind of, to me, like the art form of the great romantic pieces of literature. Although to be fair, I mean, with Braveheart, I will say he got a great score from James Horner, and he got some lovely visuals, and probably the best moments in the film, in my opinion, were the kind of romantic element with Wallace and Murron. Not the horrible thing with the princess. I don't know why they did that. It was just stupid. But the ones with Wallace and Murron were quite nice, and I liked the idea of her kind of representing something higher, like the spiritual quality of Scotland and his fight and everything. That did feel kind of just basically incongruity with the past traditions of the kind of the romance, the historical fiction romance.
Yeah, but I have to say, with things like Braveheart and The Patriots, it does stimulate a lot of kind of like people who are interested in history to kind of go off and read about the real history of these things. Just so they can point out, some of the absolute nonsense that is in those films, because people love to have I love to have a good argument about history and what's true and what's kind of myth and that sort of thing. And I mean, things like The Patriot and Braveheart, they do offer a lot of myths, that are rich and ripe for debunking in in online, historical debates and research and all that kind of thing.
And I know that that happened actually a lot surrounding, for example, the movie Titanic. There was a lot of that kind of like, interest in Titanic was really brought up by that film, even though it was, Titanic was one of those mixed films. It was like in some ways, the sinking of the ship part was actually quite good overall. But the silly romantic triangle thing, a Romeo and Juliet story, was quite good.
I think to be honest, it's you've always got to have like a kind of romantic subplot in sort of period dramas like that. Otherwise, I don't know, maybe they just can't get enough of an audience. So
yes, but did they have to make it so cringe? Is my question. Because it was.
Well, I guess they obviously felt they did have to do that. It's, but I mean, it was a successful film, so I guess they must have known what they were doing and who their audience
the bullet
was.
And
how to appeal to the audience.
Yes. So now all they need to make one. Now they need to make one about the Battle of Preston. And then it'll garner interest. Yeah, as we're saying, I mean, they have some interesting enough figures with regards to the Nithsdales and Derwentwater and others. But this is actually segue into a question. Now, a lot of people, especially the sort of people coming off of the whole Braveheart mentality, like they think of the Jacobite rebellions. They think of a war between Scotland and England. There's like some kind of a the kind of popular imagination. That's very interesting when you're looking at figures like Derwentwater, who of course is an Englishman, and this battle which takes place in England. So it's the English side of Jacobitism, which is very interesting. So, I welcome your comment on that.
Yeah, well, like you say, I mean, it's often sort of mythologized as a kind of a conflict between England and Scotland. And obviously that is not true, to say the least. Jacobitism was, it was kind of like an ideology that sort of went throughout the British Isles, including Ireland,
and Wales.
And Wales. I believe there were some Welsh Jacobites as well. Can't think of any off the top of my head, but they did exist. I know that for a fact. Mm-hmm. Lancashire in particular was a hotbed of Jacobite feeling and pro-Jacobite sentiment. It was more of a religious conflict, really, than a kind of like a national conflict between Scotland and England, because Presbyterian Scotland was not sympathetic with the Jacobites at all in any meaningful sense. I mean, there were Presbyterian Scottish Jacobites, but they were very much in the minority. The people who tended to sympathize with the Jacobite cause were Roman Catholics, for the obvious reason that having a Catholic king on the throne meant that all the sort of disabilities they had,
and the
persecutions and
marginalizations.
The marginalization, would be relieved if they had a Catholic king on the throne again. So they had an obvious reason to support the Jacobite cause. But there were also high church Anglicans who tended to be pro-Jacobite as well.
Which is an interesting parallel with the English Civil War. These were the same types of people who would have been royalist for King Charles I versus Cromwell.
Yeah, there was actually an American author. He basically wrote a book called The Cousins Wars,
mm-hmm.
the Cousin Wars, and basically the general gist of this book is that there was a geographic and kind of an ethnic component into, the sort of the wars between, so you had the English Civil War all the way to the American Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a kind of a broad sort of geographical and ethnic component, between, the different sides.
The Confederates and the Cavaliers, kind of.
So basically, the general gist of it is in the English Civil War, or more accurately, the War of the Three Kingdoms. You had, sort of the East Anglian Puritans, who were very sort of, pro-Parliament Puritans. Low church Puritans. And then you had areas like the Highlands of Scotland and the sort of the north of England, like Lancashire, that were heavily pro-royalist.
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of theme continued on into the Jacobite Rebellion, where the sort of East Anglia sort of area, all the pro-parliamentarian areas of the country were very sort of anti-Jacobite, sort of pro-Orange, pro-Hanoverian,
mm-hmm.
whereas the, sort of Lancashire was very pro-Jacobite, pro-royalist.
Mm-hmm.
In the Highlands, the sort of the Highlands of Scotland were very pro-Jacobite as well. And then this carried on during the American War of Independence. The New England settlers, for example, they were, descended, largely from East Anglian Puritans and Puritans from other parts of England.
Mm-hmm.
So the New England Patriots were largely the descendants of on the Scots, the so-called Scotch Irish,
yeah.
the Ulster Presbyterians. so so you got the East Anglian Puritans and the Scotch Irish Ulster Presbyterians. There's a continuity of the sort of the sides there. So they were parliamentarian, they were anti-Jacobite, and then they were pro-patriot. And then they were also sort of pro-union during the American Civil War. Whereas on the other hand, you had sort of the pro-royalist, sort of Northern English people in Lancashire who were then pro-Jacobite, who were then in America pro-loyalist. This is so the north of England, the Highlands, Ireland, the non-Ulster part of Ireland. These were the places where the British Army recruited most of their soldiers to go and fight against the American colonists fighting for their independence.
Which is interesting because people don't typically think of that, due to the kind of Irish nationalist, Irish Republican sort of view of history that very much funnels it down this Irish versus British in a very kind of very binary.
There's a whole different dynamic going on in Ireland up until about the 19th century.
Yeah, and I mean, I would even say that like people confuse, for example, the fact that there were different layers of society in Ireland. I think because of all of the immigration, in the US coming after the potato famine, the percentage of the view of what the Irish people were and who they were was largely basically the kind of the farmers on estates that had planted potatoes, and then when everything went due south, they tried to get out of there or starve. But it kind of skews the vision in many ways of the fact that there was a whole middle class in Ireland, and there was different people doing different jobs. It wasn't just farmers. In the lowest strata of society, as it were, there was other people doing other things, and they had different relationships with the British crown, etc. And it was more nuanced than I think people have come to view it as being.
Well, I mean, in terms of sort of like the Jacobites and the American War of Independence, the Irish were, the sort of the Irish Catholic population was quite sympathetic to Jacobitism, again, for the obvious reason that they represented freedom for Roman Catholics. But also they were a very willing recruiting base for the British Army to go, to sort of send soldiers in to kind of try and suppress the rebellion in America. It's actually quite interesting because the same people and the same types of people, the descendants of the same people who were very pro-royalist, very pro-Jacobite, in the 1770s, 1780s, they kind of did a big 180, because I mean, by about the 1750s, it was and at the end of the Jacobite, the 45 rebellion, it became pretty obvious that Jacobitism was a dead cause. It was a lost cause. Yeah. And I think at that point, Catholics throughout the British Isles, they sort of came to a realization that the Stuarts were never going to be coming back to the throne. That was and
a lot of them sat out the 45 for that reason. There was kind of this sense that it was a gamble, and so some did jump in on it, but a lot sat it out.
Yeah, well, I mean, after the 1715 Jacobite Rebellion, there was a lot of it was a brutal reckoning for a lot of the people who survived the battle and were taken prisoner. There was they were executed for treason up and down the country. for taking part in the rebellion, and so.
And this is where we get to Derwentwater's farewell and the Derwentwater lights.
Oh yeah. So just to expand upon that. So when Derwentwater's body was being taken, as you were alluding to just there, as he was being taken back to his burial place, his estate in Northumbria for burial, the Northern Lights sort of came down, and it was taken as a kind of an omen or a symbol of him sort of his soul being taken to heaven.
He was well liked by many.
Oh yeah, he was a very popular romantic figure in history, and if Ainsworth had only just been a bit more, sort of
dynamic, if he had just been
dynamic and suited for more modern tastes. I mean, Derwentwater would be seen as a romantic figure in the image of Bonnie Prince Charlie himself.
Yeah. And I mean, to me, he's so much more cool than Bonnie Prince Charlie, in my opinion. Actually, I like him better as a character.
I mean, he was a very sort of noble. He was a very sort of devoutly religious, but he was his retainers loved him. The people who worked his land loved him. He was very well regarded, and he sort of died bravely on the scaffold, whereas Bonnie Prince Charlie basically became an angry alcoholic.
Yeah, exactly. And Bonnie Prince Charlie didn't seem, I don't know, it's like he had good qualities and everything, but he did not seem particularly like devout, nor did he seem
Now, from what I've read, he did actually make a secret visit to England and actually converted.
Now, I'm not sure if he did convert to Protestantism, but I think he basically said, if you think it will help me, I'll do it. If you think there's a chance for me to get something, if I'm Anglican, I will do it.
I think it would be fair to say that he wasn't truly he wasn't truly devout.
He was a cultural Catholic.
He was. If he thought it would get him the throne, he would. He
was President Biden.
He was willing to pander to whoever. I mean, he's not. I mean, Derwentwater, I would say, was by far a better person than he deserves to be treated more kindly by history and to be seen as a more romantic figure than Bonnie Prince Charlie does.
He's beloved by us Catholic Britophile history nerds, all 5 of us, but we still love him.
So so Derwentwater, he was he was a very sort of noble figure. He died bravely on the scaffold, whereas Bonnie Prince Charlie, he kind of like he ran away after the Battle of Culloden. I think he
didn't come back again.
One of his own retainers looked at him running away and basically said, that's it, run,
you cowardly Italian.
Run, you cowardly Italian. I
should take that personally, but
I mean, I'm guessing he sort of lived in exile in Italy at one point. He probably was more Italian than.
I think he probably had some kind of a weird combined accent from living in various parts of continental Europe. It's kind of Franco-Italian. Generative accent.
I'd love to know what he actually sounded like, but
me too. Because I remember
he obviously came across as foreign. He obviously came across as foreign to those people around him, and it.
Which I think added to the sense. Which I think added to the sense where people were like, why are we fighting and dying for this guy exactly? You know, there was sort of a sense, not to say that, I mean, obviously people didn't get a Dutch guy, number one with William of Orange, then get a bunch of Germans with the House of Hanover to come over. So as far as foreign guys, I mean, but still, you know, if people were going for this sort of sense of getting one of our own back, you know, I don't know if Bonnie Prince Charlie really was, strictly speaking. But I mean, he was colorful. I mean, I have one of my many back burner book projects was actually a history of the 45. So it was basically me just binging on all of the different anecdotal stuff that I had collected over the years. And I still have the draft. I have not yet finished it in any reasonable capacity, but it's one of those projects someday.
Yeah, you'll get back to it someday at some point in the future when all the other things are done.
Oh yeah. And but yeah, no, it's very interesting, really. The fact that the 1715 could have been well known, but just kind of wasn't. And those parts of it that I think do stick in the memory are mostly like niche things. So for example, some folk music that does deal specifically with the 15. Like there's a song, Come Ye or for France, that Maddie Pryor made popular. And that one deals with the 17 and the Highland Quorum and all of that. So it deals with that kind of thing, and it mocks George the First. So it's very much of that era. Yeah.
And then there's that famous lament, Derwent Water's Lament, as well.
Beautiful piece too, very haunting.
Although I think it's generally played on the Northumbrian pipes.
It is
rather than the bagpipes, and again,
which is fitting. I feel like that's another kind of thing where it's like the Scots steal the thunder with their Highland bagpipes, but you know you've got the English have bagpipes too.
after a fashion, yeah.
They don't make as much of a splash, but you know they're there.
Yeah. No, well, I mean, again, the sort of the 19th century people did make Highland culture a lot more kind of prominent, sort of Highland, heritage.
The Wizard of the North managed to achieve that, which is interesting. And I think actually, though, it's kind of funny because it also eclipses lowland Scottish culture quite a bit sometimes, where people what they have in their head about what is Scotland is mostly Highland stuff, not as much lowland stuff, not as much, and that kind of came right through with things like Braveheart, obviously, but also in many other things that we just have in our heads about, like, well, what was the role of Scotland in Britain, in the British Empire, in all kinds of things. There's a tendency to not only just focus on the Highlands and different things that went on with the Highlands, but also romanticize that to the point of not getting the history, even approaching correct.
Yeah. Well, I believe that the kilt, it was a Highland custom, but I believe it was popularized by George IV, who apparently he started. I don't know if this is apocryphal, but apparently he started wearing a kilt because it was more flattering to his figure than.
He fell in love with skirts. Which I can understand, seeing pictures of George IV.
So yeah, maybe I should talk about sort of Lancashire and the sort of the dynamic that was going on there. Give it's good. Give a summary
of the dynamic. What was the dynamic in Lancashire, and what went down with the Battle of Preston?
Right. So Lancashire was a very sort of pro-Tory, pro-Jacobite area. It was also one of the most Catholic. It was also one of the most Catholic parts of England. There was a lot more recusancy in Lancashire than pretty much anywhere else in England. So it was a very, there was a lot of Jacobite sympathy in Lancashire, basically, and it's one of the reasons why the Jacobites marched down from Scotland and chose to go through Lancashire on the way to London, because they felt that there would be a lot of support there and people would flock to their banner, to reinforce their army as they marched south towards London. As it turned out, a lot of that pro-Jacobite sympathies was a lot of hot air, and there were a lot of what they referred to at the time as tavern Tories, who would sit in a tavern and sort of sing pro-Jacobite songs like
"To the King across the water," and we're definitely not getting off the couch to help him.
Yeah, but basically they were kind of like Jacobite. There was a lot of Jacobite slacktivism sort of going on in Lancashire. So when they marched through, they got some people joining them as recruits, but the recruitment was quite disappointing. A lot of they weren't recruiting anywhere near as many as they hoped and anticipated. Which is something that annoyed the Highlanders that were part of the army that marched south. It annoyed them immensely, because they didn't actually want to march south into England. They wanted to restore him to the throne in Scotland. They weren't. Most of the Highlanders weren't actually that interested in what happened in England. They wanted to bring the old pretender to the throne in Scotland, and then just kind of like, it's like, England, do your own thing. We want to be an independent kingdom run by the rightful king.
Right, and they tended to be less connected to England than the Lowlands as well. So there was a different dynamic going on with them, and it kind of repeated itself in the 45 as well. Same thing, where you had the we need to go to England, and the Highlanders are like, do we need to go to England?
Yeah, but basically, a lot of the Highlanders just weren't interested in what the Stuarts wanted, which was to regain the throne of the entire British Isles. That they just
triple
wanted
crowns.
They just wanted to restore their monarch to the Scottish throne, and then everybody else could do their own thing, basically. But it was only because some of them was like, well, you can't, you never, Scotland is not going to be secure unless the Stuarts are restored to the throne, throughout the British Isles. So they kind of had to be cajoled into sort of invading England and coming down south. And they were very disappointed by the lack of support in England. It was mostly rhetoric than anything else. They did get a few hundred recruits in England from Lancashire, but mostly it was like sort of thoughts and prayers kind of thing.
Yeah. They changed their Facebook. They changed.
They put the Stuart banner in their Facebook profiles, basically. It was
the white rose. We remember you.
So they came down from Scotland through Northumbria, through Cumbria, and eventually they found themselves in Preston. And they hung around in Preston for quite a long time, for a couple of days, apparently, because apparently the Prestonians knew how to party.
We can party with the people changing their Facebook status to reflect support. They may be annoying, but they know how to throw a bash. That's the important thing.
And I mean, they did get a trickle of supporters coming in. For example, the Radcliffes of Lytham Hall,
so which is
near where I live. His son, apparently came over and tried to join the Jacobite army there. So yeah, they were getting a steady trickle of recruits, not the deluge, not the flood of recruits that they were hoping for. But yeah, anyway, so they hung around in Preston for a bit too long. So, you know, while they were doing this, Carpenter and Wills were coming in while they approached, while they were partying and gallivanting around in Preston. Eventually, they had Preston surrounded, and it turned into a siege.
Interesting.
Yeah. So what happened then is they tried to assault Preston, and they were repelled on several occasions. On the first day, they assaulted Preston, which had been, the Jacobites basically barricaded themselves into Preston. They built up loads of barricades, set up, sort of like observation posts and everything. They basically fortified themselves into Preston, and 2/3 of the army were Scottish Highlanders. So they were very much a sort of a warrior caste, very, very determined fighters. The English, the Lowland Scots were probably less
fluffier folk.
Yeah, they were more peaceful, sort of civilian folk, who, sort of fighting wasn't necessarily in their blood. So they were kind of like coming in and, sort of, they didn't really know what they were doing. And they did, a lot of them didn't like fighting, and a lot of the English Jacobites, after the first day of assaults and fighting, they were deserting in droves and trying to desert across the Ribble into the surrounding countryside.
They probably started to think, this is getting kind of real, and do we really want to bring warfare to our own turf? At a certain juncture, it's like, is it worth it really?
I think at that point they thought that the adventure wasn't quite as fun as they anticipated it would be.
Yeah, exactly.
But the Highlanders, apparently they shot dead a few English Jacobites who were trying to escape because they weren't impressed with their cowardice. Apparently,
seriously, they did not sound impressed. No.
No. They threatened anyone who even talked about surrendering, and even the guy who was nominally in charge of the English Rebellion, Thomas Forster. That was his name. So yeah, Thomas Forster was he was a character that he was not a very impressive person. Thomas Forster's way of handling stress and setbacks was to retire to bed early and go to sleep and hope all the problems would go away by the time he woke up in the morning. But they put him in charge because he was a Protestant. Basically, he was a Tory High Church Anglican Protestant, and he wasn't suitable for leading a Jacobite army in England. And Derwentwater, who brought a lot of retainers with him as a very popular and brave figure. He was Catholic, so he wasn't suitable either. So they chose Thomas Forster because he was a Protestant. Basically, he didn't really have any other.
They chose the boring Protestant over the cool Catholic, and see what happened.
Yeah. And it didn't get it. I'll be honest, it didn't go very well. He didn't really know what he was doing. He was notorious for basically retiring to bed when things got too stressful. That was basically.
I feel for him there, but I mean, we all want to do that. He just
went to bed. So okay, the government is closing in on us, and this is very stressful. Right, I'm off to bed. Wake me up in the morning if anything. Wake me up if anything bad happens. Just wake me up. Oh
no.
Yeah.
Let me guess, things didn't work out well for him in the end.
Well, actually, yeah, he was arrested, and obviously he was charged with treason, but he actually managed to escape from the tower.
Oh, good for him.
Along with Mackintosh and some of the others. So
nice.
he actually managed to escape. But basically, so Ball and Mackintosh and Thomas Forster and some of the other prominent, they managed to overpower their jailers and escape into exile. Derwentwater didn't.
Yeah.
And Kenmure didn't either. Was it Kenmure?
Nithsdale did.
Yeah. So so Derwentwater basically died a noble death on the scaffold, having he refused to run away and escape. So he was captured with his men, and he went bravely to the scaffold and became a martyr for the Jacobite cause.
And he will always be remembered.
Yeah. Well,
he will be remembered by those who remember him. Will be remembered by those
up to a point. Yeah.
Yes.
But yeah. So yeah, no, that's all very fascinating history, and it's great that you were able to kind of put this down in book format for people, again, in a sort of popular way, so that those who don't want to go full on down the Jacobite bunny trail, don't have to. They don't want to spend a fortune buying a very serious weighty tome. I mean, if you do want to dive into in depth into the history of it, I mean, you should probably buy his book. But if you just kind of like passively interested in the topic, and you don't want to spend more than sort of $1.99 the books.
So what is the name, just so you can advertise it to the readers, what is the name of the book again, and where can they access it?
So it's called The Preston Fight, England's Last Battle, 1715, by me, Graeme Restorick, and it's available at Amazon. It's available on Amazon, only exclusively to Amazon.
Exclusive sales copy. No, great. I will link it in below this video. And yeah, no, totally. So thank you so much for agreeing to do this historical tour de force on this really interesting slice of history. As you can tell, I'm a geek for this stuff, so I could talk about this literally all day. In spite of Zoom glitching in and out, I would still come back to talk more about it. But
yeah, no problem. And I hope your audience appreciates the interview. And if you want to go and buy my book and my sort of my online book and read about it, then yeah.
But actually, I forgot the last thing I was going to mention as well on my end is that I have now just started working, as I mentioned to you privately, but I have started working on a novel set during the American Revolution. Sort of broadly the era, most of it, it's not all in the American Revolution. It's during the era of the American Revolution. But the main character is from Lancashire, is from a recusant family in Lancashire. So that's definitely been on my head lately, all of this stuff, as I've been doing research and trying to, characterize, the situation for Catholic recusants, the 18th century, and, their difficulties, and trying to kind of stabilize an identity and wanting to be more a part of wider society and so on. So I have definitely been thinking a lot about that.
Yeah, no, well, I think what changed after the 45 rebellion, it became pretty much clear after that the Jacobite cause, it wasn't going to happen. They weren't coming back to the throne. It was a dead cause, basically. So I think what happened there is that the former Jacobite, the people who were formerly sympathetic to the Jacobite cause, in particular Catholics. I think it came at that point, it became more a case of, you know, they wanted to be able to demonstrate their loyalty.
Yeah.
The loyalty to, you know, to the Hanoverians and to George III.
I kind of
in order to try and persuade. Yeah.
I kind of indicate that as well in mine, where it's like the main character Edmund, his immediate family wasn't a part of the Jacobite rebellions, but he's had cousins who were in both, and he's had relations who were in both, and there's a certain sense for them of trying to distance themselves from that, particularly him, but his family too, and kind of even more loudly, somewhat, a little more boisterously be sort of God save the king types that we mean George our king. Yeah.
So a lot of them, I think it's probably be true to say that they felt they had something to prove, and they wanted to prove that you know, they were worthy, if you like, of having all these you know, these penal laws against them, you know, so that, you know, revoked, so that they could you know, they could play a full part in society again.
Exactly. And they didn't really know when that was going to happen, but you know, because it had been kind of an on and off thing, but with efforts to revoke, and then those efforts failing, and but yeah, with the character that I was working on, he kind of goes through a back and forth, where on the one hand he's almost like, you know, dash it all, I'll just become Anglican. He kind of goes the Bonnie Prince Charlie route to a certain extent. Where he's just like, you know what, screw this. I want to be able to get ahead in the military in a very official capacity, and it's really hard to do so as a Catholic. So forget it. I'm just gonna, you know, just become Anglican, at least nominally Anglican, and go through there. But then, because of his whole recusancy background, he feels quite guilty about it, which is something that haunts him for the rest of his journey. And by the time he kind of comes back around from the Saratoga campaign, which was a bit of a disaster, really, he sort of is ready to rediscover his religious roots and his recusancy roots. So that all of that has definitely been in my mind, and I have been referencing different things from, like, say, I've referenced Lord Derwentwater, for example, because, you know, the Northern Catholics would remember, certainly within this frame of time and stuff like that. So it's definitely something that, again, I've been just keeping in mind a lot.
Yeah, hopefully the book inspired you to do some of that. But
no, definitely it did. No, definitely. And these conversations definitely did, because I was thinking of you when I picked Lancashire, because I was just sort of like, I remember Graeme was talking about, I mean, and I knew it from other places as well, but I knew that you particularly were telling me about the recusancy history in Lancashire, and I'm saying, you know, that's definitely a good place to set, you know, some of this story. So your book and your influence has put your county on the map. Hopefully I won't fade out. We live in hope. But anyway, I'll try to advertise myself again. So Fellowship and Fairydust is a magazine dedicated to inspiring faith and creativity and exploring the arts through a spiritual lens. We accept submissions of fiction, nonfiction, poetry, and photography and artwork as well. So we have quite a diverse range of things. We also take fan fiction, which is sort of unusual for some online magazines like us. And we are hopefully soon to be going to print, so we don't always have to say online at the beginning any longer. For those who would like to support us in our endeavors, particularly in the hope of running another live conference in Oxford, as we did back in 2019. For those who'd be interested in supporting us, we have a Patreon page, which I will be linking below this video. And we also have a GoFundMe page as well, particularly for the conference. So anyone who would be interested in donating to that, any amount would be greatly appreciated to making that come into being. So otherwise, thank you everyone for tuning in and have a wonderful day. While we're waiting for him to come back.
Come ye of frae France, come ye din by lan and saw ye Geordie Welps and his bonny women. Were ye at the place, ca'd the kittle housey, saw ye Geordie's grace around on the goosey. Geordie, he's a man, there is little due to it, he does all he can. What can be with you, tit, dun there come a blade, Lincoln like me lordy, he would drive a trade at the loom of Geordie. Though the Caliph be bad, blithely may we never again we get a hair wab, it marks the full defer. We heritant are a blade, bonnet bells and sortie, horse and mailings great, but we hail Geordie. Jockeys gone to France, and Montgomery's lady, they're willing to dance. Madam, are ye ready? They'll be back beside, belted brisk and lordly, brawly may they try to dance a jig with Geordie. High for Sandy Dawn, high for Cockalorum, high for Bob and John, and his heel and quorum, many's a bonny lance, swing out heel and harity, with the skip and dance o'er the palm of Geordie.